The sun dipped low across the endless prairie, throwing long shadows across the wooden fence posts that framed the old Bar H ranch. Dust hung in the air, glowing in the last golden light of day, and the faint creak of saddle leather echoed as a tall cowboy dismounted his horse. His name was Caleb Hawthorne, a man with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too many years of solitude. He wasn't the sort of cowboy that chased after attention or tried to make a name in saloons. He was quiet, deliberate, and carried the kind of strength born not from fists, but from enduring the weight of silence and loss. He thought his life was already written, a simple story of land, cattle, and a man's will against the open sky, until she arrived. Her name was Eliza. She wasn't a girl fresh off the wagon like many thought when they first laid eyes on her, but a woman carved by hardship, scarred by whispers, and worn down by the judgment of others. She carried herself with grace, yet with the guarded air of someone who had fought to survive where kindness was scarce. She stepped onto the ranch porch with hesitant boots, her gaze steady yet uncertain, and when she spoke, her voice trembled with a truth she had repeated too many times in her life. "I'm not a virgin," she said. Her chin lifted though her throat tightened. The words seemed to hang between them, sharp as a blade. She had been told again and again that men wanted purity, innocence, someone untouched and unmarked by mistakes or circumstance. Every time she revealed her past, she braced for the look, the flicker of disappointment, the turning away, the silent judgment that confirmed her deepest fears, that she was unworthy of being chosen, unworthy of being loved. But Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't step back. Instead, he looked at her the way a man studies the horizon, calm, patient, unshaken. He reached out his hand, rough and calloused, and took hers with a gentleness that startled her. "I never asked you to be," he said, his voice low, steady, and carrying more weight than any promise she had ever been given. The air between them shifted. For the first time in years, Eliza felt the walls around her heart tremble, as if this man's words had loosened the chains she had grown accustomed to carrying. She wanted to pull away, to protect herself, but there was something disarming in the way his thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles. It wasn't the grip of a man staking a claim. It was the touch of someone saying, "You're safe here." For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. Then, when her lungs finally filled again, she looked into his eyes. They were steady and unyielding, yet beneath the steel was something else, something rare, acceptance. The night deepened around the ranch, coyotes calling from the distant hills. Eliza found herself sitting by the fire in Caleb's cabin, the warmth of the flames flickering across the wooden walls. He poured her coffee without asking if she wanted any, as though he already knew she needed something to hold on to. She took the cup, wrapping her hands around it, but her gaze drifted to the floor. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know what I've done." "What they'll say." Caleb leaned back in his chair, hat resting on his knee, eyes never leaving her. "I don't need to know what they say. I only need to know who you are when you're sitting in front of me right now." She swallowed hard, the firelight catching the shimmer of tears she hadn't meant to show. No one had ever answered her shame with such simple truth. Her story unraveled slowly in the nights that followed. She told him of the town she came from, the cruel words, the betrayal of a man who took her trust and left her broken, the women who whispered behind her back, the doors that shut when she walked past. Each confession poured from her like a storm breaking, and each time she paused, waiting for him to turn away, Caleb stayed. He didn't press her with questions, didn't weigh her with judgment. He simply listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes reaching across the table to let his hand rest over hers until her trembling eased. And in return, he began to share pieces of his own silence. Caleb told her of his brother lost to a river flood, of the years he spent believing he should have been the one taken instead. He spoke of nights riding across the prairie just to outrun the grief, of mornings when the sun rose and he felt nothing but emptiness. Pain recognized pain, and in that recognition, something fragile and precious began to take root. Days turned to weeks. Eliza found herself working beside him on the ranch, brushing down horses, gathering eggs, laughing once or twice when he teased her gently about the way she wrinkled her nose at stubborn mules. She had forgotten the sound of her own laughter. It startled her, but it also healed something deep within. One evening, As the sky bled crimson over the horizon, Eliza stood beside Caleb by the corral fence. The cattle lowed softly in the distance, and the smell of dust and leather clung to the cooling air. She turned to him, her heart pounding, and asked the question that had haunted her since the first night they met. "Why didn't you turn away when I told you the truth?" Caleb's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon for a long while before he answered. "Because I wasn't looking for a story that fits the world's rules. I was looking for someone who knows what it means to fall and get back up again." "Scars don't scare me, Eliza. They tell me you've lived." Her breath caught, and before she could stop herself, she reached for his hand. He held it tightly, no hesitation, and in that simple gesture, she realized something she hadn't believed possible, that she could be seen, known, and wanted without condition. The chapter of her life that began with shame was slowly being rewritten by the cowboy who never asked her to be anything other than herself. For the first time, hope didn't feel like a cruel trick. It felt like a promise. The weeks on the Bar H ranch stretched into months, and though Eliza found a sense of belonging she had never known before, life beneath the wide Texas sky was never without its storms. Caleb's quiet acceptance had given her courage, but courage is often tested, and the test came sooner than either of them expected. It began with whispers. A supply wagon came out from town one crisp morning, its driver a man with a sour grin and an appetite for gossip. He spotted Eliza hauling buckets by the well and tipped his hat with a sneer. "Didn't reckon I'd see her out here," he muttered just loud enough for the ranch hands to hear. "Word travels fast, you know. Folks don't forget a woman's reputation so easy." Eliza stiffened, her hands tightening on the wooden handle until her knuckles turned white. The old fear rushed back like a river breaking its banks, flooding her chest with shame she thought she had finally buried. The ranch hands exchanged glances but said nothing, though one of them spat into the dust with disgust, not at Eliza, but at the man's cruelty. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and by nightfall, Eliza found herself pacing the cabin floor, unable to quiet the voice in her head. "They'll never let me outrun it," she whispered, eyes brimming with tears as Caleb mended tack at the table. "No matter how far I go, no matter what I do, it follows me." Caleb set aside the leather strap, rising slowly. He crossed the room, resting his hands on her shoulders, steady as the mountains. "Then let it follow," he said softly. "It'll get tired before you do." But Eliza shook her head. "You don't understand. A man can start over. A woman, they carve her mistakes into her skin, and she carries them until she dies." Her voice cracked as she turned from him. "Maybe I should go before the whispers spread and ruin you too." Caleb's jaw tightened. He took her hand and spun her gently to face him, his eyes burning with an intensity she had rarely seen. "Listen to me, Eliza. I didn't choose you because the world approved. I chose you because I saw the fire in you that refuses to be put out. If anyone's got a problem with that, they'll answer to me." She wanted to believe him. She wanted desperately to cling to his strength and let it drown out her fear. But part of her still trembled, caught between the woman she was becoming and the girl the world had told her she had to be. The test of their bond came not only through whispers but through the return of a ghost from her past. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the hills, a rider approached the ranch. Eliza's stomach dropped as soon as she recognized him, James Carver, the man who had once promised her love, only to leave her shattered and disgraced in the eyes of the town. He dismounted with false charm, tipping his hat. "Eliza," he drawled, as though he had every right to stand on that soil. "Didn't think I'd find you out here. Heard you've taken up with the cowboy." His eyes flicked to Caleb, narrowing with disdain. "Can't say I expected you'd fall so far." Caleb stood silently, his hand resting near the butt of his revolver but not drawing it. His stillness carried more weight than any threat. Eliza's pulse thundered in her ears. For years she had dreamed of this moment, not with clarity, but with the gnawing ache of unfinished business. Now here he was, smirking, daring her to break under the weight of old shame. But before Caleb could speak, Eliza found her voice. It rose unsteady at first, then sharpened with each word. "You don't get to define me anymore, James. You don't get to show up and act like I owe you my silence. You broke me once, but I learned to stand without you." She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "And I found a man who sees me for who I am, not who the world says I should be. So take your whispers back to town and leave me in peace." James sneered, but the fire in her gaze made him falter. Caleb finally spoke then, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You heard the lady? Now you'd best be on your way before I decide this conversation's gone on long enough." The silence stretched, taut as a drawn bow. Finally, James spat into the dust, muttered a curse, and swung onto his horse. He rode off without looking back, his figure swallowed by the horizon. Eliza stood trembling, her breath ragged. Caleb reached for her hand, and though she clutched it desperately, she realized something profound. She had faced her ghost not because Caleb fought for her, but because his love had given her the strength to fight for herself. That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Eliza and Caleb sat by the fire. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I thought I had to be perfect to be loved," she whispered. "But you've shown me that love isn't about perfection. It's about being seen, even with the scars." Caleb kissed the crown of her head, his arm tightening around her. "Scars are proof you survived," he murmured. "And survival is more beautiful than perfection will ever be." The months that followed weren't without struggle. Ranch life was hard. Storms came and went, cattle strayed, and money was always tight. But in the quiet strength of their bond, Eliza found a new kind of freedom. No longer did she walk with her eyes downcast, fearing judgment. She met the world with her chin high, her heart steady, her hand in Caleb's, and in his steady presence, Caleb too found healing, the kind that only comes when two broken souls decide to build something whole together. Their story wasn't about a cowboy saving a woman, nor a woman redeeming a man. It was about two people choosing each other, again and again, in the face of a world that told them they weren't enough. And in that choice, they wrote a story stronger than shame, stronger than whispers, stronger than the past. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire, Eliza turned to Caleb with tears glistening in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. "I'm not a virgin," she repeated, her voice steady this time, not trembling. Caleb smiled, taking her hand as he had that very first day. "And I never asked you to be." The words no longer carried the weight of fear. They were no longer a confession. They were a declaration of freedom, of love unchained by expectation. And in that moment, as the prairie wind carried their laughter into the vast horizon, they knew they had built something the world could not break.